Lieutenant Emily Carter's boots echoed against the polished crystal floor as she approached the massive gates. She'd been preparing for this moment for 3 months, ever since Earth had finally been granted observer status in the Galactic Council. Her uniform was pressed perfectly, her credentials were in order, and she'd memorized every protocol requirement. But none of that seemed to matter now. The courtyard before the Hall of Bloodlines was packed with delegates from hundreds of worlds. Emily watched as they moved through the gates in groups, their conversations filling the air with sounds her translator struggled to keep up with. There were beings made of what looked like living crystal, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Others floated past, their forms barely solid, shifting between gas and liquid. One delegation walked on 6 legs, their scaled skin gleaming purple under the artificial suns that lit the courtyard. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. She'd dealt with aliens before, plenty of times during her service on the outer colonies. But this was different. This was the center of galactic power, the place where territorial claims were settled and resource rights were determined. Being here meant humanity mattered. Being denied entry meant the opposite. The Arbiter stood at the gates like a mountain given life. Its body was made of some kind of living stone, gray and ancient, with veins of what might have been metal running through it. The thing had to be at least 15 feet tall. When it moved, Emily heard the sound of rocks grinding together deep underground. "Halt," the Arbiter said, and its voice wasn't just sound. Emily felt it in her chest, vibrating through her bones. "State your lineage and purpose." Lieutenant Emily Carter, representing Earth and humanity in the Treaty of Sovereign Lines, she said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I'm here to observe the Council proceedings as outlined in your bloodline," the Arbiter interrupted. "Present proof of genetic lineage recorded in the archives of origin." Emily had known this might be an issue, but she'd hoped the diplomatic credentials would be enough. Humanity doesn't have records in the archives. We're a newer member of the Council community, but our presence here is guaranteed by the Hall of Bloodlines permits only those whose genetic heritage is verified and recorded, the Arbiter said. Its massive arm moved to block her path. "Your species has no entry here. Your claim to Council participation is noted but not sufficient." Around them, other delegates had stopped to watch. Emily felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their attention. Some of the aliens looked curious. Others seemed amused. A few looked satisfied, like they'd been expecting exactly this outcome. "Look," Emily said, fighting to keep frustration out of her voice, "I understand that humans are new to this. We get it. We're the kids at the adult table. But Earth signed the Treaty of Sovereign Lines. We have legal standing. My presence here isn't a request, it's a requirement of Council law." The Arbiter didn't move. "Laws change. Protocols endure. The Hall has stood for 13 million years. Its requirements do not bend for convenience or political pressure. Without verified bloodline documentation, you have no access." One of the crystal beings drifted closer, its body chiming softly. "The human makes a valid point about the treaty," it said, its voice like wind through glass. "Perhaps an exception could be." "There are no exceptions," the Arbiter rumbled. "The purity of bloodline record is what gives this Hall its authority. To allow one species to bypass verification would undermine the entire system. The human may observe from outside the chamber, as other unverified species do." Emily's hands clenched into fists at her sides. This was exactly what Ambassador Brooks had warned her about. The older species, the ones who'd been part of the Council for millions of years, they all had something humans didn't. They could trace their genetic lineages back through time, pure and unbroken. They'd carefully cultivated their bloodlines, breeding for specific traits, eliminating weaknesses. They were proud of that purity. Humans were different. Earth's history was messy. Wars, migrations, natural disasters had mixed humanity into a genetic soup. Nobody could trace their family back more than a few hundred years with any certainty. The genetic records that might have existed were lost during the resource wars. Humans were mutts, basically. Mixed, scattered, impossible to categorize in the neat boxes the Council preferred. "So that's it," Emily said. "Thousands of years of human history, billions of people, and we don't matter because we can't produce some ancient genetic paperwork." "Your species matters," the Arbiter said, and for the first time, its tone softened slightly. "But this is the Hall of Bloodlines. Only those with verified heritage may enter. It is not personal. It is protocol." More delegates had gathered now, forming a loose circle around Emily and the Arbiter. She recognized a few species from the briefing materials. The tall ones with the glowing crests were from the Corinthian Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful factions. The floating jellyfish-looking creatures were Veroti, known for their genetic research. Others she didn't recognize at all. They were all watching her. Waiting to see what the human would do. Waiting to see if she'd accept her place outside the hall, accept that humanity was second class. Emily opened her mouth to argue further, to demand they contact Ambassador Brooks, to make some kind of formal protest. But before she could speak, something changed. It was subtle at first. A shift in the air, a change in the light. The conversations around the courtyard died away. Every being present turned toward the gates, their attention pulled by something Emily couldn't quite identify. Then she saw it. Beyond the Arbiter, beyond the crystal gates, something was moving. The Guardian. Emily had read about it in the briefing files, but the descriptions hadn't prepared her for seeing it in person. Its form was impossible to focus on, like trying to look at something that existed in more dimensions than her eyes could process. Sometimes it looked almost solid, other times it seemed to be made of pure energy or light or something else entirely. The Guardian had stood watch over the whole of Bloodlines for thousands of years. The files said it had never moved, never spoken, never acknowledged any delegate or species. It simply existed, a silent witness to the Council's proceedings. But now it was moving. Now it was coming toward the gates. Toward Emily. The Arbiter stepped back, its massive body suddenly seeming small. The other delegates moved away, creating space, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to something that might have been fear. The Guardian emerged from the hall, flowing through the crystal gates like water passing through silk. It approached Emily directly, and as it got closer, she could see patterns in its form. Spirals of light, geometric shapes that folded in on themselves, colors that didn't have names in any human language. The courtyard had gone completely silent. Even the artificial suns seemed to dim. The Guardian stopped in front of Emily. For a long moment, nothing happened. She could feel it studying her, examining her in ways that had nothing to do with sight. It felt like being read, like every cell in her body was being catalogued and understood. Then the impossible happened. The Guardian lowered itself before her. Not much, but enough. A gesture of respect, recognition, something that made every other being in the courtyard go absolutely still with shock. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Emily's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. But somehow, she knew that everyone present could hear it too. You are the last. For several seconds, nobody moved. Emily stared at the Guardian, trying to process what had just happened. Around her, she heard the sounds of alien languages erupting in confusion. Someone dropped something that shattered against the crystal floor. Another delegate made a sound like a strangled whistle. What does that mean? Emily finally managed to ask. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The last what? The Guardian's form rippled, and somehow Emily knew it was responding to her question even before it spoke again. Come with me, it said, and this time the words felt gentler, almost warm in her mind. There are things you must see. Things your species has forgotten. The massive crystal gates swung open without anyone touching them. Beyond them, Emily could see corridors that seemed to stretch forever, walls that glowed with moving patterns of light and color. The Guardian flowed back toward the entrance, then paused, waiting for her. Emily looked back at the Arbiter. The ancient being stood frozen, its stone face somehow conveying complete shock. In 10,000 years of standing guard, it had never seen the Guardian move. Nobody had. I don't understand what's happening, Emily said to it. The Arbiter's voice was barely a whisper, that grinding stone sound now subdued. Neither do I. In all my time here, across millennia of service, the Guardian has never acknowledged anyone. Never spoken. Never left its post. You should go. When the Guardian calls, you answer. Emily took a deep breath and walked through the gates into the Hall of Bloodlines. The interior was nothing like she'd expected. The corridors didn't follow normal physics. She'd walk forward for what felt like 10 steps, but somehow cross a distance that should have taken 10 minutes. The walls weren't really walls, more like windows into data streams. She saw genetic sequences flowing past, millions of them, each one representing a bloodline from somewhere in the galaxy. The Guardian led her deeper into the hall. They passed chambers dedicated to different species. Through one doorway, Emily glimpsed a room filled with golden light, with genetic charts of the Corinthians displayed in intricate detail. Another chamber showed the Veroti lineages, glowing patterns that looked almost like jellyfish swimming through data. Each chamber they passed felt like a library of genetic history. Emily realized she was seeing the accumulated bloodline records of hundreds of species, some going back millions of years. It was beautiful and overwhelming and made her feel incredibly small. Finally, they reached a section of the hall that felt different. The light here was dimmer, older somehow. The air itself seemed heavy with age. Emily noticed that the walls here didn't have the same flowing data streams. Instead, they were marked with symbols she'd never seen before, characters that looked almost familiar but definitely weren't any human language. The Guardian stopped in front of a massive doorway. The door was sealed shut, and Emily could see layers of what looked like security measures wrapped around it. Energy fields, physical locks, things she couldn't even identify. "What is this place?" she asked. "The Lost Archive," the Guardian replied. "Sealed when the first Galactic Council was formed, 13 million years ago. Sealed because those who came before decided that what lay within was too dangerous for younger species to know. Too dangerous, or too humbling." As Emily stepped closer, something strange happened. The security measures began to deactivate. Energy fields flickered and died. Locks clicked open. The massive door, which looked like it weighed more than a building, started to swing inward. "Wait, why is it opening?" Emily backed up a step. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't have to," the Guardian said. "The archive recognizes you. It responds to what you carry in your genetic code, even though you don't know you carry it." The door opened completely, revealing a chamber beyond. Unlike the other rooms they'd passed, this one was almost empty. Just a single pedestal in the center, standing in a circle of soft light. On top of the pedestal sat something that looked like a holographic display, but more advanced than any technology Emily had seen. She walked closer, and the display activated. At first, she saw human DNA. The familiar double helix, the genetic markers she'd learned about in school. But as she watched, the image expanded. The human DNA started connecting to other sequences, branching out like a tree root system. She saw connections to dozens of other species, genetic similarities she didn't understand. "I don't get it," Emily said, studying the display. "This looks like human DNA is related to all these other species. But that's impossible. We evolved on Earth. We have fossil records, archaeological evidence. We know where we came from." The Guardian moved closer to the display, and as it did, the image expanded even further. Now Emily could see something that looked like a massive genetic tree. At the base, at the very root, was a single sequence. From that root, branches spread out in every direction. She recognized some of them. They were the species she'd seen chambers for in the hall. But there were hundreds more, maybe thousands, all branching from that single point of origin. And there, at the end of one thin, winding branch that had somehow survived while others had been trimmed and shaped and cultivated, was humanity. "Your civilization is young," the Guardian said. 10,000 years of recorded history, yes. Your current form evolved on Earth, that's true. But your bloodline, your genetic heritage, that's far older than you know." Emily's heart was racing now. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that every species in the Galactic Council, every bloodline recorded in this hall, they all come from the same source. The ancestors. The first race. They existed long before any current civilization, before the concept of the Council itself. They were the first to achieve consciousness, the first to reach the stars, the first to understand the deep patterns of the universe." The display zoomed in on that root sequence, and Emily saw complexity beyond anything she'd imagined. This wasn't just DNA, it was something more sophisticated, more intentional. "The ancestors did something that no species has done since," the Guardian continued. "They chose to start over. They had become so powerful, so advanced, that they could barely remember what it meant to be mortal. So they scattered themselves. They broke their genetic code into pieces and spread it across thousands of worlds. Some of those fragments became bacteria. Others became potential, genetic sequences waiting for evolution to build something new." Emily felt like the floor was tilting under her feet. "You're saying humans are descended from these ancestors?" "Not just humans. Every species in the Council carries ancestor genetics. But here's what makes humanity unique. The other ancestor fragments were found, over millions of years. Other species discovered them and recognized their value. They cultivated those genetic sequences, refined them, bred them into their populations. They created the pure bloodlines you see recorded in this hall. Genetic lines focused on specific traits, enhanced abilities, specialized evolution." The Guardian's form shifted, becoming almost human-shaped for a moment. But one fragment remained hidden. One world was overlooked, left alone for long enough that evolution took its natural course. The ancestor genetics on that world mixed and scattered and survived catastrophes. It remained wild, uncultivated, exactly as the ancestors intended when they first chose to start over. Earth, Emily whispered. Yes. Humanity developed without interference, without genetic cultivation. You mixed, you migrated, you survived ice ages and wars and disasters. Your genetic code remained chaotic, diverse, unpredictable. While every other species in the Council was refining their ancestor heritage into something pure and specialized, humanity kept it raw and complete. Emily looked back at the display, at that winding branch leading to human DNA. So when you said I was the last, I meant you are the last species carrying the ancestor genetic code in its original, unmixed, uncultivated form. Every other Council race has spent millions of years perfecting single aspects of the ancestor heritage. They made themselves specialists, masters of specific traits. But in doing so, they locked themselves into evolutionary paths they cannot escape. The Guardian moved closer to Emily, and she could feel something like sadness in its presence. Humanity remained generalist. You carry all the ancestor traits in potential, not refined into any single direction. You are what the first race was before they chose specialization. You are what they hoped their descendants might become. You are the last, Emily Carter. The last true ancestors walking the galaxy. Emily walked out of the Hall of Bloodlines in a daze. Her mind was still trying to process what the Guardian had shown her. The courtyard that had been packed with delegates before was now almost empty. Word had spread fast. Really fast. She could see alien beings hurrying toward their ships, their embassies, anywhere they could send messages back to their homeworlds. The few delegates who remained kept their distance from her. They stared, some openly, others pretending not to while stealing glances. Emily recognized the look. It was the same expression she'd seen on people's faces back during the colony wars when they realized their enemy had better weapons than they'd thought. Fear. A human transport was waiting at the edge of the courtyard. Ambassador Brooks stood beside it, and even from a distance, Emily could see the tension in his shoulders. She'd worked with Brooks for 6 months now. He was usually calm, collected, the kind of diplomat who could negotiate trade deals while smiling at people who hated him. Right now, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Get in, Brooks said as soon as she was close enough. We need to go. Now. Emily climbed into the transport, and Brooks followed, sealing the door behind them. The vehicle lifted off immediately, heading back toward the human embassy complex. Through the windows, Emily could see more ships launching, streaks of light against the artificial sky of the Council station. So you heard, Emily said. Brooks laughed, but there was no humor in it. Heard? Emily, every species in the Council heard. The Guardian spoke for the first time in recorded history, and what it said is tearing apart political structures that have stood for millions of years. He pulled up a holographic display, and Emily saw screens full of incoming messages, all marked urgent or emergency. 17 species have filed formal protests in the last hour. The Corinthian Empire is demanding an emergency council session. The Varoti Collective has sealed its borders. 3 minor factions have suggested, very politely, that humanity should voluntarily submit to genetic testing for the good of galactic stability. Genetic testing, Emily repeated slowly. They want to study us like lab rats. Some do, yes. Others want worse. Brooks swiped through more messages. There's a faction pushing to have humanity classified as a potential threat. They're arguing that if we really carry original ancestor genetics, we're too unpredictable to be given full council status. Too dangerous. The transport banked hard, and Emily grabbed the seat to steady herself. Through the window, she saw why. Another ship had crossed their path, close enough to be a warning. It was a Corinthian vessel, sleek and predatory-looking. They're getting aggressive, Brooks muttered. I've been a diplomat for 20 years, and I've never seen the council races move this fast on anything. Usually, it takes them decades to agree on meeting schedules. Now they're mobilizing fleets. Fleets? Emily's stomach dropped. You're saying they might actually attack Earth? Brooks was quiet for a moment, which was answer enough. Then he said, put yourself in their position. Every species in the council has built their entire civilization on one idea. Bloodline purity equals superiority. They've spent millions of years carefully breeding themselves, eliminating genetic diversity, focusing on specific traits. The Corinthians bred themselves to be perfect warriors. The Varoti became masters of biological science. Every major species did this. It's not just their culture, Emily. It's their identity. The transport docked at the human embassy, and they hurried inside. The building was chaos. Staff members rushed between rooms, security personnel checked weapons systems, and communication officers spoke urgently into headsets. Emily had never seen the embassy like this. It felt like a warship preparing for battle. They made their way to Brooke's office, and the Guardian was already there. Its presence made the room feel both larger and smaller at the same time. The being had somehow traveled from the hall to the embassy without anyone seeing it move. "They are scared," Emily said to the Guardian. "The other species. That's what this is about, isn't it?" "Yes," the Guardian replied, its voice resonating directly in her mind again. "The Council races have built everything on the belief that their genetic refinement makes them superior to their ancestors. That millions of years of careful breeding elevated them beyond their crude beginnings. Humanity proves that belief is a lie." Brooks pulled up another display, this one showing genetic charts. "I've been reading the files you sent over," he said to the Guardian. "Trying to understand this. From what I can see, every Council species has incredibly focused genetics. The Corinthians have perfect reflexes, enhanced strength, aggressive instincts bred in at the cellular level. But that's all they have. They sacrifice genetic diversity to get those traits." "Exactly," the Guardian said. "They became specialists. Magnificent at what they do, but incapable of being anything else. A Corinthian cannot suddenly develop scientific intuition. A Varoti cannot suddenly become a warrior. They locked themselves into evolutionary paths millions of years ago, and those paths have no branches. They cannot change. They cannot adapt. They simply are what they are." Emily understood now. "But humans can change. We're not specialized. We've got bits of everything in our genetics." "Not bits," the Guardian corrected. "You have the complete set. The full ancestor genetic code, unpruned, uncultivated. Every human carries the potential to develop in any direction. Given time, given the right circumstances, given pressure or need, humanity could evolve abilities that Council races spent millions of years trying to breed into themselves." A new alarm blared through the embassy. Brooks checked his display and his face went pale. "They're here. Corinthian warships just entered Earth's solar system. 17 of them." Emily moved to the window. She couldn't see anything from here, but display screens throughout the office showed the feed from Earth's defense satellites. The Corinthian ships were massive, each one the size of a small city. They moved into formation around Earth like predators circling prey. "They are broadcasting a message," one of the communication officers called out. "Putting it through now." A hologram appeared in the center of the office. The Corinthian admiral was impressive and intimidating. His crest glowed with aggressive colors, and his eyes held no warmth. "This message is for the human government and the entity known as Lieutenant Emily Carter. The Galactic Council has passed an emergency resolution regarding the genetic hazard posed by humanity. You have 48 hours to comply with the following terms." The Admiral's image was replaced by a text document. Emily read it and felt ice in her veins. They wanted her turned over for immediate genetic analysis. They wanted all human reproduction placed under Council oversight. They wanted Earth to accept permanent observer status with no path to full membership. And they wanted humanity to agree that any humans showing signs of genetic awakening would be immediately detained and transferred to Council facilities. "And if we refuse?" Brooks asked the hologram, even though it was a recording. As if answering his question, the Admiral's image returned. "Refusal will be interpreted as a hostile act against the stability of the Galactic Council. Your species will be considered a threat to all civilized worlds. Appropriate measures will be taken." The hologram ended. For several seconds, nobody in the office spoke. "They're going to destroy us," someone whispered. "They're actually going to destroy Earth." Emily looked at the Guardian. "You said I carry awakened ancestor genetics. That I'm different from other humans. What did you mean by that?" The Guardian's form shifted, becoming slightly more solid. "Most humans carry the ancestor code dormant. It's there, but inactive, waiting for some trigger that may never come. In you, something has awakened. Perhaps it was the stress of your military service, perhaps genetic chance, perhaps something else. But you have access to abilities that the ancestors possessed, abilities that the Council races fear above all else." "What abilities?" "Understanding," the Guardian said simply. "The ancestors didn't conquer the galaxy through force. They conquered it through comprehension. They understood physics so completely that they could bend it to their will. They understood biology so deeply that they could heal any wound or modify any life form. They understood minds so thoroughly that conflict became pointless because they could see exactly what their enemies feared and wanted and believed. Emily looked out at the displays showing the Corinthian warships. 48 hours. 2 days to either surrender humanity's future or face extinction. Can I do that? Can I understand them enough to stop this? I don't know, the Guardian admitted. Your abilities are awakened, but untrained. Using them requires not just power, but wisdom. The ancestors spent lifetimes learning to wield their gifts properly. You have 2 days. Brooks stepped forward. Then we'd better get started. Because I don't see any other option. Our military can't fight 17 Corinthian warships. Our diplomacy has failed. If Emily really does carry some kind of genetic ace up her sleeve, that's our only play. Emily nodded slowly. She thought about her training, her service, all the impossible situations she'd survived that should have killed her. The times she'd understood enemy tactics before they happened. The way she'd learned alien languages in days instead of months. The dreams she'd always had of places and times that couldn't possibly be real. Maybe they had been real. Maybe she'd been accessing ancestor memories without knowing it. Okay, she said. Teach me. Show me how to use whatever this is. Because in 48 hours, I'm either going to save humanity or get us all killed trying. 24 hours had passed since the Corinthian ultimatum. Emily stood in the observation deck of humanity's main orbital defense platform, watching the alien warships through the massive viewport. They hadn't moved from their positions, just sat there like daggers pointed at Earth's heart. Below her, she could see the blue curve of her homeworld, peaceful and unaware of how close it was to annihilation. She'd spent the last day trying to understand what the Guardian meant by awakening her abilities. It wasn't like flipping a switch. There were no instruction manuals for becoming an ancient cosmic being. Mostly, she'd been meditating, which felt ridiculous when 17 warships were preparing to destroy her planet. Ambassador Brooks walked into the observation deck, carrying a tablet displaying real-time updates. He looked even worse than yesterday, his eyes red from lack of sleep. The Corinthians just sent another message. They want an answer in 12 hours now, not 24. They're getting impatient. Emily didn't turn from the viewport. Let them wait. Emily, our defense forces are in position, but the military commanders are telling me it's hopeless. Those Corinthian ships have weapons that can crack continental plates. Even if we used every nuclear weapon we have, we'd barely scratch their shields. We need a plan. I'm working on it. Brooks set the tablet down with more force than necessary. Working on what, exactly? Sitting here staring at space? I know the Guardian said you have these abilities, but we're running out of time. Maybe we should consider their terms. Observer status isn't great, but it's better than extinction. Now Emily did turn to face him. You mean surrender me for genetic testing, let them control human reproduction, and basically become lab animals for the Council? That's not observer status, Brooks. That's slavery with better words. It's survival. It's the end of humanity as a free species. Emily walked closer to him. Those Corinthians up there, they're not scared because we're dangerous. They're scared because we prove their entire civilization is built on a lie. For millions of years, they've believed that genetic purity makes them superior. That breeding out diversity and focusing on single traits elevated them above their ancestors. We prove that's backwards. That they traded flexibility for specialization and locked themselves into evolutionary dead ends. Brooks rubbed his face. I understand the philosophy, Emily. I really do. But philosophy won't stop those warships from firing. The Guardian materialized beside them, its form more stable than Emily had seen before. She's right to wait, it said. Rushing will accomplish nothing. The abilities she needs cannot be forced. They must be understood. We don't have time for understanding, Brooks snapped. We have 12 hours. Then let me try, Emily said. She moved back to the viewport, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Guardian, you said the ancestors understood things so deeply that reality bent to their will. How did they do it? What's the trick? There is no trick, the Guardian replied. Understanding is not a shortcut or a cheat code. It's seeing the true nature of things. The ancestors looked at the universe and saw not just what it was, but why it was. They saw the patterns beneath the patterns, the connections that others missed. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about everything she'd learned in her military training. How to read enemy movements, predict tactics, understand motivations. It was all about seeing patterns, understanding what your opponent wanted and feared. Maybe this was similar, just on a bigger scale. She let her mind relax, stopped trying to force anything, and just felt. At first, there was nothing unusual. She felt the cold of the viewport, the hum of the station's life support, the tension in Brooke's voice. Normal human sensations. Then something shifted. It was like her awareness suddenly expanded. She could feel the station systems, not just hear them. The power flowing through the circuits, the oxygen being recycled through the air filters, the gravity generators creating the artificial weight that kept everyone's feet on the floor. She didn't just know these systems existed, she understood them at a fundamental level. She pushed further. Her awareness spread beyond the station, touching the satellites orbiting Earth, the communication networks, the defense platforms. She could feel data flowing through quantum channels like water through pipes. She could sense the electromagnetic fields generated by Earth's magnetic core, the solar radiation from the sun, the gravitational pulls of the moon and other planets. And she could feel the Corinthian ships. They weren't just metal and technology. She could sense the beings inside them, hundreds of Corinthians on each vessel. She felt their emotions like heat signatures. Fear, yes, but also righteousness. They genuinely believed they were protecting the galaxy from a threat. They'd convinced themselves that humanity was dangerous, unpredictable, a genetic hazard that needed to be contained or eliminated. Emily gasped and opened her eyes. The observation deck looked different now. She could see energy patterns in the air, quantum possibilities branching out from every decision point. The Guardian's form made more sense suddenly. It existed across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. I can feel them, she said. The Corinthians. I can sense what they are feeling, what they are thinking. Brooke stepped closer. What are they thinking? They are terrified, Emily said. Not of what we are now, but of what we might become. They've modeled it out, run simulations. If humans really carry complete ancestor genetics, and if those genetics start awakening across the population, within a few generations we could develop abilities that took them millions of years to breed into themselves. We'd make their genetic refinement look like a waste of time. So they want to stop that from happening, Brooke said. More than that. They want to prove it can't happen. If they destroy us or control us, it proves that genetic purity and specialization are superior to the chaotic diversity we represent. It validates everything they've built their civilization on. The Guardian moved closer to Emily. You're beginning to understand. The conflict isn't really about military power or political control. It's about identity. The Council races need humanity to be wrong, because if we're right, they've wasted millions of years of evolution. Emily turned back to the viewport, and this time when she looked at the Corinthian ships, she saw more than just metal hulls. She saw the genetic code of every being aboard, saw the millions of years of careful breeding that had created them. They were magnificent warriors, perfect killing machines, but that's all they were. They couldn't be scientists or artists or philosophers. Those traits had been bred out of them long ago in pursuit of military perfection. I need to talk to them, Emily said. That's what diplomacy is for, Brooks replied. We've been trying to talk to them for 24 hours. They're not interested in conversation. Not that kind of talk. Emily closed her eyes again, reaching out with her expanded awareness. She found the quantum communication network that connected all the ships, the invisible web of data transmission that let them coordinate. In her normal state, hacking into that network would have been impossible. The encryption alone would take supercomputers years to crack. But she wasn't in her normal state anymore. She understood the network at a level deeper than code or encryption. She saw the mathematical principles underlying it, the quantum entanglement that made it work, the patterns of information flow. And understanding it meant she could touch it, influence it, become part of it. Brooks saw what was happening on his tablet first. Emily, what are you doing? The Corinthians are detecting an intrusion in their communications network. They're tracing it back here. They think we're attacking them. I'm not attacking, Emily said, her voice distant. I'm introducing myself. She rode the quantum network across space to the Corinthian flagship. The ship's security systems were impressive, multiple layers of protection designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. But security systems were based on preventing unauthorized access, and Emily wasn't accessing anything. She was simply understanding it so completely that the distinction between her and the network began to blur. She appeared on the bridge of the Corinthian flagship as a hologram, but one that felt more real than any projection technology could create. The Corinthian bridge crew jumped to combat positions, weapons appearing in their hands with practiced speed. The admiral stood from his command chair, his crest flashing bright red with aggression. Human, you violate our ship's security. This is an act of war. No, Admiral, Emily said, and she was surprised by how calm her voice sounded. This is an act of communication. I needed to talk to you, and you weren't answering my calls. She could see him now, really see him. Not just his physical form, but the genetic code that created him. She saw thousands of generations of Corinthian breeding, each one carefully selecting for aggression, reflexes, tactical intelligence. She saw what they'd kept and what they'd eliminated. The Admiral was a masterpiece of genetic engineering, perfect for his role. And completely incapable of being anything else. You prove our point, the Admiral said, gesturing at her holographic form. You display abilities that no natural being should possess. Abilities that make you dangerous to every species in the galaxy. You must be contained, studied, controlled. Emily felt something then, a deeper understanding clicking into place. The Admiral wasn't wrong to be scared. From his perspective, from the Corinthian worldview built on millions of years of genetic certainty, humanity was terrifying. They'd spent so long believing that specialization was the path to perfection. The idea that they'd actually limited themselves, that they'd traded potential for focus, threatened everything they believed about themselves. Admiral, she said gently, I'm going to show you something. I'm not going to hurt you or control you. I'm just going to help you understand. She reached out with her awakened abilities, not to invade his mind but to share perspective. She showed him what the Guardian had shown her, the genetic tree of the ancestors, the branching paths that every species had taken, the choices made millions of years ago. She showed him the Corinthian path, how they'd achieved magnificent things but closed off other possibilities. And she showed him the human path, the chaotic, unmixed, unpredictable genetic code that carried all possibilities but had mastered none. The Admiral staggered, his crest cycling through colors that indicated confusion, fear, and something else. Understanding, maybe. Or the beginning of it. We're not your enemies, Emily said. We're proof that there was another way. But that doesn't make your way wrong. It just makes it different. The galaxy is big enough for both. The Corinthian Admiral stood frozen on his bridge, his crest cycling through colors Emily had never seen before. Around him, his crew members had lowered their weapons, though they looked confused about why they'd done it. Emily could feel the conflict happening inside each of them, their bred instincts for aggression fighting against the new understanding she'd shared. This is impossible, the Admiral finally said, his voice quieter than before. What you showed me, those genetic paths, the choices our ancestors made. We were taught that our evolution was progress. That we became superior by refining our bloodlines. You did become superior, Emily said. At warfare, at tactics, at everything you bred yourselves to be. Look at your ships, your military precision. Humans couldn't build a fleet like this in 1,000 years. You're magnificent at what you do. But we cannot be anything else. The Admiral's crest dimmed to a dark blue that Emily somehow knew meant sadness. We eliminated the genetic sequences that would have allowed us to be scientists, artists, philosophers. We chose the warrior path and closed all other doors. Your ancestors made that choice because they believed it was right for their species, Emily said. Maybe it was. You've survived for millions of years, built an empire, protected your people. That's not nothing, Admiral. That's everything. One of the Corinthian crew members stepped forward, younger than the others. But the humans, they can still choose any path. They have all the doors still open. Yes, Emily admitted. We're not specialized. We're messy and chaotic and we don't know what we're doing half the time. But we carry potential in every direction. Given enough time, given the right circumstances, humans could develop the abilities that you spent millions of years breeding into yourselves. Not because we're better, but because we kept all the options. The Admiral's tactical display showed the other Corinthian ships, all holding position around Earth. Emily could sense the crews on those ships too, could feel their confusion as their Admiral stayed silent instead of giving attack orders. Some were getting nervous. Some were wondering if their commander had been compromised. My crew thinks I should fire on your world, the Admiral said. My orders from the Council are clear. Humanity represents a genetic threat. We should eliminate that threat before it grows. It's logical. It's strategic. It's genocide. Brooks' voice came through the communication channel. Emily had almost forgotten he was still watching from the defense platform. You'd be destroying billions of innocent people because you're afraid of what they might become. We are afraid, the Admiral said, and the honesty in his voice surprised Emily. The Corinthian Empire has stood for 8 million years. Our genetic purity is the foundation of our identity, our culture, our understanding of ourselves. If humanity proves that purity is not strength, then what are we? What was the point of those 8 million years? Emily felt a wave of compassion for him. He wasn't a monster. He was a being trying to protect everything his species believed about themselves. She reached out again with her expanded awareness, but this time not to show him genetic trees or evolutionary paths. This time she just let him feel what she felt. The love she had for Earth, for humanity in all its messy diversity. The pride she felt in her species' stubborn refusal to give up, even when facing extinction. The hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't require anyone to die. The Admiral's crest shifted to a color Emily hadn't seen yet, something like purple mixed with gold. She didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. "Lieutenant Carter," he said slowly, "you are using abilities that should not be possible for someone with only days of training. The ancestors took centuries to master such control. How are you doing this?" Emily thought about it. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because human genetics are still flexible. We don't have millions of years of breeding telling us what we can and can't do. We're making it up as we go along. That's kind of humanity's thing." A different voice came through the communication channel, this time not from the Corinthian ships but from somewhere else. Emily recognized the harmonics. It was one of the Varoti, the jellyfish-like beings who specialized in genetic science. "Admiral, this is Researcher Meln of the Varoti Collective. We've been monitoring this exchange. We have a proposal." The Admiral's crest flashed with annoyance. The Varoti were not authorized to join this conversation. "Nonetheless, we are here," the Varoti said, their voice like wind chimes. "We have been studying the genetic data from the Hall of Bloodlines. The human bloodline is indeed descended from the ancestors, carrying the complete genetic code. But we've also analyzed something else. Our own genetics, the Corinthian genetics, all council species. We're all incomplete by comparison." "We know this already," the Admiral said. "Yes, but what we didn't know is that the incompleteness is reversible. The genetic sequences we bred out of ourselves aren't gone. They're dormant, locked away in what we thought was junk DNA. With human help, with access to their complete ancestor code, we could potentially reactivate those sequences. We could regain the flexibility we lost." Emily felt hope surge through her. "You mean the council species could undo their specialization?" "Not completely," the Varoti researcher said. "Millions of years of evolution cannot be reversed in a generation. But over time, yes. With human genetic code as a template, council species could slowly reintroduce the diversity they eliminated. We could become more than we are." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Emily could sense the battle happening inside him. His breeding told him to protect Corinthian purity at all costs. But the understanding she'd shared with him, the glimpse of what his species had lost, that was fighting against his instincts. Finally, he spoke. "If we do not destroy humanity, if we instead learn from them, what happens to the Council? What happens to the whole of Bloodlines and the entire structure of our civilization?" "It changes," the Guardian's voice joined the conversation, speaking to everyone at once. "Change is not death, Admiral. It is growth. The ancestors understood this. That is why they scattered themselves, why they chose to start over. They knew that perfection is a trap. That believing you have reached the end of evolution means you have stopped evolving." Brooks stepped closer to Emily on the observation platform. "Are they actually considering this? Standing down?" "I think so," Emily whispered. She could feel the decision forming in the Admiral's mind, could sense the other Corinthian ships waiting for his command. The Admiral's crest settled into a solid green color. "Fleet, this is Admiral Command. Stand down from attack positions. Move to defensive formation only." Emily heard cheering erupt in the defense platform control room. Brooks let out a breath he'd been holding for what seemed like hours. But the Admiral wasn't finished. "Lieutenant Carter, I am requesting formal negotiations with human leadership. The Corinthian Empire does not admit error easily, but we may have been too hasty in our assessment. If the Varoti claims are accurate, if human genetics could help restore what we have lost, then destroying you would be strategically foolish." "I'll take strategically foolish over genocidal," Brooks muttered, but he was smiling. Over the next 6 hours, more ships arrived in Earth's orbit. Not Corinthian warships, but diplomatic vessels from dozens of council species. Word had spread about what happened, about Emily's demonstration of ancestor abilities, about the possibility of reversing millions of years of genetic specialization. The Guardian remained on the defense platform with Emily, its form more stable than ever. You did well, it said. Better than I expected, honestly. Most beings with newly awakened abilities become drunk on power. You used yours to build understanding instead. I didn't have much choice, Emily said. She was exhausted, her head pounding from the effort of maintaining that expanded awareness for so long. It was either help them understand or watch my planet get destroyed. You always had a choice. You chose wisely. Ambassador Brooks was frantically organizing meetings, scheduling diplomatic sessions, trying to handle the sudden flood of council species wanting to talk to humanity. Earth's government was scrambling to respond, pulling in experts from every field to prepare for negotiations that would reshape the galaxy. Emily watched it all happen from the observation deck, feeling strangely disconnected from it. A week ago, she'd just been a lieutenant trying to get into a hole that didn't want her. Now she was apparently the bridge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, the living proof that the ancestors' genetic legacy still existed in its original form. What happens now? She asked the Guardian. The council species are going to want human help reintroducing genetic diversity. That's going to take generations, maybe thousands of years. How do we handle that? Carefully, the Guardian said. With wisdom and patience. The council races spent millions of years specializing themselves. Reversing that will not happen quickly. But you've given them something they lost long ago. Hope. The possibility of change. That's more valuable than any genetic sequence. A new hologram appeared in the observation deck. It was a formal notification from the Galactic Council, delivered simultaneously to every embassy and every council member species. By unanimous decision, humanity was being reclassified. Not as an observer species. Not even as a full member species. Humanity was being acknowledged as an ancestor race, with all the rights, responsibilities, and protections that designation carried. Brooks read the notification and laughed in disbelief. They're putting us above the council structure. We're not members anymore, we're founders. That's insane. It's accurate, the Guardian said. Humanity carries the genetic code of the first race. By council law, that makes you ancestors. The fact that you're also young and chaotic and barely understand your own heritage doesn't change that status. Emily looked down at Earth, at the blue world that had somehow become the center of galactic politics overnight. She thought about all the humans down there, billions of people who had no idea they carried ancient genetic code in every cell. People who would wake up tomorrow to learn that their species was simultaneously the youngest civilization and the oldest bloodline in the galaxy. The Guardian called me the last, Emily said quietly. But I'm not, am I? Every human is what I am. Every person on Earth carries the same potential. Yes, the Guardian agreed. You were simply the first to awaken. But others will follow. As humanity spreads across the galaxy, as they face challenges and grow and adapt, more of them will access their ancestor heritage. Not all at once. Not in the same ways. But gradually, your species will remember what the first race knew. And what did they know? The Guardian's form shifted, becoming almost human-shaped, and Emily could have sworn it smiled. That diversity is not weakness. That specialization is not superiority. That the future belongs not to the pure or the perfect, but to those who can adapt, change, and grow. The ancestors learned this lesson the hard way, over countless millennia. You, Lieutenant Carter, learned it in 48 hours. Perhaps that's the real power of unchanged genetics. The ability to understand quickly what others take lifetimes to see. Ships continued to arrive in orbit, council species coming to witness the new era that had begun. The whole of Bloodlines was already being redesigned, creating a new chamber that would stand above all others. A chamber dedicated to humanity, to the last and cultivated ancestor bloodline, to the species that proved specialization was a choice, not a destiny. Emily Carter stood at the window, watching it all begin, knowing that her life would never be simple again. She was the first, but not the last. The beginning of something that would take thousands of years to fully unfold. And somewhere in her genetic code, in sequences passed down through countless generations, the ancestors watched through her eyes and recognized what they had always hoped their descendants would become. Not perfect. Not pure. Just endlessly, beautifully capable of being anything at all.